Nigeria, uplifting the people and uniting the nation.
Counsel Nnamdi Kanu's trial to self-defense with evidence before trial. Lawmaker calls for enactment of law to grant Nigerians self-defense status. Oldest serving PDP lawmaker and 5 others defect to APC. Kaduna State Government to prioritize sustainable wash management.
Government has spent a lot of resources in the construction of these facilities.
The commentary is on challenges surrounding youths with mental health illness. You can follow us on Instagram and X at Radio Nigeria HQ and on Facebook at facebook.com/Radio Nigeria Network. Now the news in detail. The Federal High Court in Abuja has directed the prosecution led by Chief Adegboyega Awomolo, SAN, to serve the defense led by Kanu Agabi, SAN, all relevant documents, materials and videos intended for trial before being tendered as evidence in court. Justice James Omotosho gave the order while delivering a ruling in the ongoing trial of the detained IPOB leader Nnamdi Kanu. At the resumed hearing today, the court took a firm stance on trial procedures following confusion over legal representation and tension surrounding courtroom conduct. According to Justice Omotosho, a letter from one Charles Ude claiming to be Kanu's lawyer necessitated his concern. However, lead defense counsels Chief Kanu Agabi, SAN, and Aloy Ejimako, while dissociating the team from Ude's claim, insisted they don't know him. Confirming further, Mazi Kanu at the proceedings affirmed that Agabi remains his official legal representative. However, in the bid to maintain order, the presiding judge stressed that only 16 counsels out of the 29 listed will be recognized in court. After taking party arguments, the matter was subsequently adjourned to May 7 for the continuation of trial, specifically for the examination in chief of the second witness. A member representing Gusau Safi Federal Constituency of Zamfara State, Kabiru Ahmadu, wants the National Assembly to enact laws that will grant Nigerian self-defense status against all forms of attacks from terrorist groups and other criminal elements. Contributing to an argument, urgent matter of public importance during the House plenary, Mr. Ahmadu explained that motions and other resolutions from the National Assembly on security matters did not address the security challenges confronting the nation. He cited the lingering security menace in Zamfara State and other states of the Federation that were yet to be addressed despite several resolutions from the National Assembly. The lawmaker pointed out that if urgent measures were not taken, innocent citizens would continue to suffer from the activities of terror groups and other criminal elements. Still with the National Assembly, the oldest House of Representatives member Mutu Nicholas and 5 other members of the House from Delta State had defected from the People's Democratic Party PDP to the All Progressive Congress APC. Mr. Mutu Nicholas from Delta State, who have been in the Green Chamber since 1999, defected alongside Victor Nwokolo, Thomas Ereitam, Nnamdi Ezechi, Julius Pondi, and Ukodiko, all from Delta State. According to the defected members, unresolved disputes in PDP, both at national and zonal levels, was the reason for their defection. Also, 2 members of House of Representatives from Labour Party, LP from Enugu State, have defected to People's Democratic Party, PDP. The defected members, who are Mr. Mark Obeta and Mr. Dennis Nnamdi, cited the performance of the governor, Enugu, and the division in Labour Party for the reasons for their defection. The Minister of Livestock, Alhaji Idi Mukhtar, says the ministry's focus is on supporting animal farmers regardless of skill to enhance genetics livestock production. The minister stated this when he visited the chairman, Mango Local Government Council of Plateau State, Honorable Emmanuel Nwapong. Alhaji Idi Mukhtar said this move will improve meat and milk qualities as well as produce healthy animals for export. He also explained that the livestock industry would meaningfully engage the youth to reduce unemployment in the country. Chairman Mango Local Government Area, who appreciated the minister's visit, expressed confidence the agricultural sector in the local government will be grossly improved. Also speaking, the Mishkahan Magavu Da Joint Putman, represented by the district head of Mango Da Moses Dawa, praised the minister for the proactive measures taken to support the grassroots.
Radio Nigeria, uplifting the people and uniting the nation.
In a world of diverse cultures, religion, and belief, these differences shouldn't divide but bind. Bound together in love, we can complement each other's strength. Indeed, Nigeria is a blessed nation and its diversity a blessing. For more on how to harness this blessing, join Utobenyu on Common Ground Matters every Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on the network service of Radio Nigeria as we further discuss how to foster and promote peace and unity. Common Ground Matters fosters and promotes peace and unity every Tuesday at 10 a.m. on Radio Nigeria Network. Join us. The 2024-2025 season of the Nigeria Premier Football League may have passed its climax, but the thrills, suspense, drama, and excitement are yet to die down. Radio Nigeria, the largest radio network in Africa, has kept to tradition by bringing you the commentaries. Our live coverage this midweek is from the ancient city of Ibadan, where Shooting Stars Sports Club, who have gone over 9 matches without a win, play host to Sunshine Stars of Akure in what promises to be beyond just a Southwest derby. Will the Oluyole Warriors team the winner Wales, who are staring relegation in the face, or will the Raging Wales overwhelm the struggling Warriors? To find out, join the network service of Radio Nigeria from 3:30 p.m. on Wednesday at Spraker between West Bible concert Amash.
Africa Business Council Conference has commenced today in Tunis with over 70 countries including Nigeria participating. With over 150 speakers expected to make presentations on various topics around the theme, which is driving Africa's transformation. The regional first vice president of the West African Action Network on Small Arms, WANSA, Mr. Martin Igwe, advised the Nigerian delegation to consolidate an advancement of intra-trade relationships in Africa as part of a non-kinetic strategy to end gun violence in Nigeria and West Africa. He emphasized that trade creates wealth and welfare for societies as well as engages youths meaningfully, thereby ensuring reduction in conflict and violence. To speak more on the Tunisia Africa Business Council Conference starting today, we have on the phone the representative of the West African Action Network on Small Arms, Ms. Ebere Ebeawuchi.
It's basically to gain more investment in finances, more opportunities in the areas of trade, help Nigeria to gain more legitimate trade deals, capable of advancing international trade now, engaging in economic development, most especially in African business, investing in financial opportunities. As doing so, create more jobs and opportunities for the youth.
And what advice do you have for Nigerians, especially young people, in terms of business, given the high level of unemployment and unemployability?
Nigerian government should consolidate more on the intra-African trade and investment opportunities, complement efforts basically towards realization of peace, sustainable development in Nigeria and West Africa at large. Yeah, we're going to be having, relevant stakeholders, organizations in Africa, thereby promoting business and investment and financial opportunities. When the youths are, engaged positively, gun-related crimes and violences will be eliminated and there will be sustainable peace in Nigeria.
Over the years, the organization WANSA has been involved in the campaign against gun violence as well as the proliferation of small arms. How does it intend to further promote its mandate at the Tunisian talks?
Basically, it's for the youth to be more involved in trade. When you have more investments, we tend to have opportunities, thereby curbing unnecessary violence that is not exactly sustainable for us as a youth. We, as a body, WANSA, will advise Nigerian youth to embrace more opportunities to complement better Nigeria as much as we can. We appeal to Nigerian youth to embrace peace and sustainable development in Nigeria.
So, apart from the conference,
aside meetings that will be happening, there will be exhibitions, there will be workshops. We have over 150 speakers meet and greet. There are a lot of people that will be meeting, basically exchanging business ideas. There will be meetings, there will be work panels, aside talk shows that will be happening too.
And that was Ms. Ebere Ibawuchi on an earlier conversation. That's her, the West African Action Network on Small Arms. That's an earlier conversation I had with her on the Tunisia African Business Council conference beginning today in Tunis. Moving on, an 8-man delegation from Gambia is in Nigeria for a 10-day knowledge exchange program on civil service reforms. The delegation, led by the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Public Service in the Gambia, Mr. Sheriff Diallo, said the surgery to Nigeria was necessitated by the need to learn from Nigeria its robust reform models that cuts across public payment, pension reforms, recruitment, staff promotion and training, and many other areas. According to Mr. Diallo, Nigeria practiced a robust reform system that catered its population and diverse needs, noting that the Gambia had a lot to benefit from its understudy of the Nigerian system. The Director General, Bureau of Public Service Reforms, Dr. Dasuki Aradi, who received the delegation in his office in Abuja, advised the delegation to work for the establishment of an independent public service reforms office to be domiciled under the presidency for effective political backing for the activities. Dr. Arabi assured the delegation of every support to satisfy their knowledge quest and noted that public reforms needed patience to mature before their benefit can be fully enjoyed. The Kaduna State Government has reaffirmed its commitment towards rural transformation through sustainable water management and sanitation across the state. The Director General of the Kaduna State Rural Water Supply and Sanitation Agency, Mr. Mubarak Ladan, made this known during an inspection visit and the official handing over of the water, sanitation and hygiene wash facility in Soba and Sabongori local government areas of Kaduna State. Daniel Karl-Marx has a report.
Access to clean water and sanitation remain part of the sustainable development goals that have become a major concern to governments, organizations, and development partners around the world, especially the desire to meet the global deadline by 2030. Part of effort to achieve this goal, the Kaduna State government, through RUWASA, has implemented and handed over water, sanitation, and hygiene wash facilities, including the rehabilitation and construction of latrines and solar-powered boreholes to primary schools and health care centers across the state. The Director General explained that the move is in line with Governor Obasani's drive to transform rural communities and improve their well-being for socio-economic growth and development.
Government has spent a lot of resources in the construction of these facilities, and their own role or responsibility is to ensure proper utilization and usage of these facilities through proper monitoring. The Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Senator Obasa, he made promise that rural transformation is going to be his focus.
Chairman of Soba local government area of Kaduna State, Mohammed Lawal Shehu, said meeting the global deadline was a collective responsibility and pledged commitment to support the initiative.
We are fully committed towards making Soba local government open defecation free.
Water, sanitation and hygiene coordinator in Sabongori local government, Hajia Bilkisu Mohammed, highlighted some of the projects in the area.
4 projects in different locations. One is Dogara Health Clinic, then Angori is under Basao. One we have 2 in Pakroma, in LGA, and the other one in PSC.
In some of the benefiting communities, traditional leaders, healthcare officials and head teachers promise to take total ownership of the facilities.
We teachers and our pupils and even the community, we are benefiting with the water. We are grateful.
30 communities across the 11 ward of the LGA for the provision of solar transport. We are hoping to get another intervention.
The ongoing tour by the Kaduna State RUWASA across the state is aimed at inspecting and handing over the wash facilities to the benefiting communities. This is with a view to ensuring access to clean drinking water and sanitation to curb the spread of water-related diseases, especially at the underserved and the hard-to-reach areas, to promote inclusive governance for growth and development of the state and the country at large. In Kaduna, Daniel Karl-Marx, Radio Nigeria.
In the meantime, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control and Prevention, NCDC, through its Infection Prevention and Control IPC unit, has stressed the critical importance of hand hygiene in safeguarding public health, preventing infections and curbing antimicrobial resistance. The head of Disease Prevention and Control at the NCDC, Dr. Tochiopo, stated this at an event to mark this year's World Hand Hygiene Day at the Maitama District Hospital, Abuja. Dr. Opo said hand hygiene practice is far more than routine procedure, but a constant for health security.
I urge every healthcare professional, every institution, and every policymaker to recommit not just to clean our hands, to safe systems, to trusted care, and a shared culture of accountability.
The media director of Maitama District Hospital, Dr. Rita Moniya, noted that more than 60% of infectious diseases could be prevented simply by practicing good hand hygiene at the right time and in the right manner.
Timely, as we celebrate this World Hand Hygiene Day, to remind ourselves about the importance, going back to what we have learned about the importance of hand hygiene.
The Mandate Secretary of Health Services and Environment in the Federal Capital Territory Administration FCTA, Dr. Adedolapo Fashawe, called for continuous and all-month audits of healthcare facilities to ensure that hand hygiene becomes a routine behavior. The head of industrial relations at the Nigerian Labour Congress NLC, Mr. H.R. Suzu, says labour unions are actively engaging the government at strategic levels to ensure workers' demands is met. Mr. Suzu made this known while speaking on Politics Nationwide and network program on Radio Nigeria. He expressed concern that many government officials appeared indifferent to workers' welfare, questioning why priority was often given to awarding contracts instead of addressing both governance and labour concerns simultaneously.
We have those who are in executive positions who don't really care about salaries. They can withhold salaries, they can fail to implement new money, but they are busy declaring contracts here and there. And I'm wondering, those rules you are building, is it for animals? Is it not for human beings? If the human beings die, who will apply those rules? So you find out that their attention has been shifted.
Also contributing to the program, the former National Secretary of the Nigerian Union of Journalists, NUJ, Mr. Shaibu Leman, lamented the lack of press freedom and inadequate welfare for journalists in the country.
The welfare package of Nigerian journalists, remuneration and other allowances, good and decent working conditions, these are primary concerns from what I have seen over the past years. You see the working conditions of journalists, even in government-owned media, is nothing to write home about. The studios are bad, the newsroom are in terrible shape. You can hardly sit down and write a good story in that kind of choking and chaotic condition.
On the review of media laws, Mr. Lemon emphasized the need for a holistic overhaul of the entire media landscape to enhance professionalism and protect journalists' rights.
Radio Nigeria, uplifting the people and uniting the nation.
It's Nigeria's #1 disability inclusion talk show, airing every Friday from 10 till 11 a.m. on the network service of Radio Nigeria. Join the conversation as we tackle pressing disability issues, spotlight inspiring voices, and drive inclusive change, one story at a time.
Thank you for creating a space where we are truly heard.
With interviews, expert insights, and your live phone-in contributions, this is more than a program. It is a movement for inclusion. Brought to you by TAF Africa, with support from the European Union through the EU SDGN project, working to promote inclusive governance for all Nigerians. Don't miss Disability Inclusion Talk Show every Friday at 10 a.m. only on the network service of Radio Nigeria. Let's build an inclusive Nigeria together.
Your gateway to information on transformative education. TETFUN Radio Link, the program that keeps you abreast on the activities of tertiary education trust fund. TETFUN comes up every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. Discover how TETFUN is revolutionizing research, infrastructure, and academic excellence in Nigeria's tertiary institutions. Get insights into TETFUN innovative initiatives, success stories, and impact on Nigeria's education sector. Don't miss expert discussions, interviews, and updates on TETFUN's interventions, including research funding, infrastructure development, and academic staff training. Join the conversation, ask questions, and get informed. Tune in every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. for TETFUN Radio Link, only on Radio Nigeria. TETFUN Radio Link, empowering education, enhancing Nigeria's future.
Radio Nigeria, uplifting the people and uniting the nation.
The people of war-torn Effium community in Ohauku local government area of Ebonyi State have appealed to the state government to halt the proposed demarcation of the ancestral land to create an autonomous community for the exiled people, as such action will deepen the conflict in the area. Briefing newsman in Abakaliki, the President General Effium Town Union, Prince James Agena, described the proposal by the state government as an action not born out of mutual understanding, dialogue and compromise. He appealed to the state government to withhold assent to the bill passed by the State House of Assembly seeking to give legal backing to the creation of autonomous communities in the area and renaming political wards pending a public hearing on the proposal.
We urge the governor to immediately halt the proposed demarcation of Effium land, the creation of autonomous communities for example, and the reorganization and renaming of the electorate. We call on the governor to engage in broader consultation with all stakeholders. This public hearing will ensure that any resolution reached is fair, equitable, and sustainable.
Prince Agena called on the global community and human rights organization to intervene and ensure that the people of Effium were not forced out of their homeland. The Ebonyi State government plans to embark on a demarcation of the war-torn area to restore lasting peace this week. Over now to sports update.
Flying Eagles head coach Aliyu Zubairu says his team will put in their best tomorrow to defeat Kenya in their final Group B match at the 2025 Africa Under-20 Cup of Nations in Egypt. Zubairu's side started the campaign with a 1-0 win over Tunisia and followed it up with a goalless draw against Morocco in their second game in Cairo on Sunday night. Coach Zubairu said they will be more offensive against Kenya in their final group match tomorrow.
I think we are the only team that has not considered a goal, if I'm not mistaken, in the tournament. I think we are defending well. It's not a bad one. It's not a bad result. But all the same, we need to come out of our shell. We will use all our available opportunities to attack in the fullest. That is what we are going to do in the next match against Kenya.
Nigeria are second in Group B with 4 points from 2 matches, level with group leaders Morocco, who holds a superior goal difference. Kenya sit at the bottom of the table after losing 3-2 to Morocco and 3-1 to Tunisia in their opening 2 matches. A win for the Flying Eagles tomorrow will guarantee them a place in the quarterfinals and bring them one step closer to qualifying for the 2025 FIFA Under-20 World Cup in Chile. The first ticket to this season's UEFA Champions League final will be taken tonight when Inter Milan of Italy hosts Spanish side Barcelona in the second leg of the semi-finals. The first leg of the fixture ended 3-3 at Camp Nou last week. This will be the 18th major European meeting between Inter Milan and Barcelona. Each of the last 2 games between the teams have ended 3-3. Barcelona have won just one of their 6 away UEFA Champions League matches against Inter Milan, a 2-1 win in December 2019. Barcelona have managed just 5 wins in 24 away games in Italy, their lowest win ratio in any non-Spanish nation in the competition. Inter Milan are their 3rd UEFA champion, while for Barcelona, it will be their 6th final if they make it to the showpiece event at Allianz Arena. The second semi-final second leg will be decided tomorrow at Parc des Princes between Paris Saint-Germain and Arsenal. I am Linus Harry.
And over now to commentary, which is on the challenges surrounding youths with mental health illness. It is written by Rashida Usman, a core member with the Current Affairs Unit.
Mental illness, also called mental health disorders, refers to a wide range of mental health conditions that affects one's mood, thinking, and behavior. Mental health is a state of well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well, work well, and contribute to community engagements. Many people have mental health concerns from time to time, but a mental health concern becomes mental illness when ongoing signs and symptoms cause frequent stress and affect human ability to function. A mental illness can make one miserable and can cause problems in daily life. In most cases, signs and symptoms of mental illness can vary depending on the disorder, circumstances, and other factors. It can affect emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. The physical health impacts of mental health issues on youths should also not be underestimated, which can lead to sleep disturbance, insomnia, daytime fatigue, and other sleep-related problems. According to medical experts, mental health disorder symptoms sometimes appear as physical problems such as stomach pain, back pain, headaches, or other unexplained aches and pains. Mental health is an integral part of health and well-being that underpins the individual and collective abilities to make decisions, build relationships, and shape the world. Meanwhile, the importance of mental health cannot be overstated, as it affects the overall quality of life, relationships, and productivity. In other words, good mental health enables people to think clearly, make sound decisions, and build strong relationships. However, mental health issues among youth have become a pressing concern in recent years due to a combination of cultural, social, and economic factors. Many young people struggle to cope with the pressures of modern life and its demands. The stigma surrounding mental illness falls down to inadequate access to support and resources, coupled with a lack of awareness and understanding. In addition, many youths lack access to mental health services, particularly in rural areas. Meanwhile, many feel embarrassed or ashamed to discuss their mental health conditions, fearing judgment or rejection from their peers, family, or the community. Considering the challenges surrounding mental health to the social and economic development of any nation and individual, it becomes very necessary to give it the desired attention. Therefore, promoting healthy social media use habits such as media literacy, critical thinking skills, and addressing the root causes of mental health challenges is essential to reducing the stigma surrounding mental illness. In other words, by encouraging open conversations about mental health, society can create a safe and supportive environment where young people feel comfortable discussing their struggles. That is, it can also increase access to affordable and accessible mental health services, which is crucial to supporting youths with mental health issues. Not only this, investing in school-based mental health services, expanding mental health resources, and providing training for mental health professionals would go a long way.
Mariam Okesanjo on challenges surrounding youths with mental health illness as written by Rashida Usman. Now for weather update, Damaturu, Jalingo, Sokoto, Lokoja, Mina and the Federal Capital Territory are mostly sunny with temperatures from 22 to 31 degrees Celsius. It is partly cloudy in Abakaliki, Port Harcourt, Ibadan and Lagos at 28 degrees Celsius. Now to end the news, here's a recap of the major stories. The Federal High Court in Abuja has directed the Prosecution Counsel in Mazi Nnamdi Kanu's case led by Chief Adegboyega Awumolo San to serve the defense led by Kanu Agabi San all relevant documents, materials and videos intended for trial before being tendered as evidence in court. A member representing Gusau Safe Federal Constituency of Zamfara State, Kabiru Ahmadu, wants the National Assembly to enact laws that will grant Nigerian self-defense status against all forms of attack from terrorist groups and other criminal elements. The oldest House of Representatives member, Mutu Nicholas, and 5 other members of the House from Delta State have defected from the People's Democratic Party PDP to the All Progressives Congress APC. We also reported that the Kaduna State government is to prioritize sustainable water, sanitation and hygiene management in rural areas of the state. That's the news edited by Conrad Labe and the production team. I am David Umoru. I'm still on Radio Nigeria with issues of the moment coming up next. The conversation is about why Nigeria works to protect education.
Radio Amuludun amúlùdùn rétà ni ò tí ì mọ̀ rédíò tó gbalẹ̀ tó ti gbàlú káàkiri ní gbogbo ni wọ́n ti ń gbọ́ wa tẹ̀gàn ló kù sẹ́ rédíò amúlùdùn yìí wájú 99.1 ní rédíò amúlùdùn FM Moniya nìbàdàn la ń gbé ti mú gbogbo ìlú dùn àwa ni ó jẹ́ tètò àtòrò tó kúrẹ́rẹ́ gbọ́ rédíò amúlùdùn ńbàdàn.
From generation to generation, ilé ayé. Ẹ jẹ́ ká mú lẹ́sọ̀lẹ́sọ̀ ká ṣe jẹ́jẹ́. Ilé ayé ò tó torí ẹ ṣe kìtàkìtà. Ilé ayé ò tó nǹkan. Ilé ayé ò ṣe torí ẹ ṣe kìtàkìtà. Ilé ayé ò tó nǹkan. Generation ilé ayé ẹ jẹ́ ká mú lẹ́sọ̀lẹ́sọ̀ ká ṣe jẹ́jẹ́ ilé ayé ò ṣe torí ẹ ṣe kìràkìtà ilé ayé ò tó nǹkan ilé ayé ò ṣe torí ẹ ṣe kìràkìtà ilé ayé ò tó nǹkan. Omi tá a bá dà sórí ilẹ̀ ló bọ̀. Omi tá a bá dà sórí ilẹ̀ ló bọ̀. Tó bá dọjọ́ ọjọ́ kan a ó jìnnì iṣẹ́ wa a ó jìnnì iṣẹ́ wa o Ọlọ́run ọba. Tó bá dọjọ́ ọjọ́ kan a ó jìnnì iṣẹ́ wa a ó jìnnì iṣẹ́ wa Ọlọ́run ọba. Èmi ni mo jù ẹ́ lọ ìwọ ló jù mí lọ lọ́ọ́ dá wàhálà sílẹ̀ nílé ayé. Èmi ni mo jù ẹ́ lọ ìwọ ló jù mí lọ lọ́ọ́ dá wàhálà sílẹ̀ nílé ayé. From generation to generation ilé ayé ẹ jẹ́ ká mú lẹ́sọ̀lẹ́sọ̀ ká ṣe jẹ́jẹ́ ilé ayé ò ṣe torí ẹ ṣe kìràkìtà ilé ayé ò tó nǹkan ilé ayé ò ṣe torí ẹ ṣe kìràkìtà ilé ayé ò tó nǹkan. Vanity upon vanity, all is vanity, vanity. Vanity upon vanity, all is vanity, vanity. Vanity upon vanity, all is vanity, vanity. Vanity upon vanity, all is vanity. lórí òkò vanity upon vanity all is vanity 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 upon vanity all is vanity vanity. Ẹ̀yin ọ̀dọ́mọdé ẹ má ṣe jà o. Ẹ̀yin ọ̀dọ́mọdé ẹ má ṣe jà o. Ìyàwó pẹ̀lú ọkọ ẹ má ṣe jà o. Ọ̀rẹ́ pẹ̀lú ọ̀rẹ́ ẹ má ṣe jà o. Ẹ̀gbọ́n pẹ̀lú àbúrò ẹ má ṣe jà o. Má ṣe jà, má ṣe fàjọgbọ́n, sọmọlúwàbí láyé rẹ o. Má ṣe jà, má ṣe fàjọgbọ́n, sọmọlúwàbí láyé rẹ o. Èrè wo nìjà ní tó ṣe kọ́kọ́? Èrè wo nìjà ní tó ṣe kọ́kọ́? Ohun tó wà nílé ayé pọ̀ ju tìjà. Ilé ayé ò tó nǹkan. Ohun tó wà nílé ayé pọ̀ ju tìjà. Ilé ayé ò tó nǹkan. From age of 1 to age of 20, àṣìwà lọ́mọ ìbáwí. From age of 1 to age of 20, àṣìwà lọ́mọ ìbáwí. From age of 20 to age of 40, a ṣẹ̀ṣẹ̀ bẹ̀rẹ̀ ayé. From age of 50 to age of 60, àgbàṣe nǹkan ní. From age of 50 to age of 60, àgbàṣe nǹkan ní. From age of 60 to age of 70, ọjọ́ ti dalẹ̀. From age of 80 to age of 90, over time, yeah. Vanity upon vanity, always vanity, vanity. Vanity upon vanity, always vanity, vanity. Asán lórí asán, òfò lórí òfò. Asán lórí asán, òfò lórí òfò. Vanity upon vanity, always vanity, vanity. Ẹ̀yin ọ̀dọ́mọdé ẹ má ṣe jà o. Ìyàwó pẹ̀lú jà o. Orílẹ̀-èdè sórílẹ̀-èdè ẹ má ṣe jà o. Ọ̀rẹ́ pẹ̀lú ọ̀rẹ́ ẹ má ṣe jà o. Má ṣe jà, má ṣe fàjọgbọ́n, ṣọmọlúwàbí láyé rẹ o. Má ṣe jà, má ṣe fàjọgbọ́n, ṣọmọlúwàbí láyé rẹ o. Má ṣe jà, má ṣe fàjọgbọ́n, ṣọmọlúwàbí láyé rẹ o. Má ṣe jà, má ṣe fàjọgbọ́n, ṣọmọlúwàbí láyé rẹ o. Ṣàlàyé fún wípé ìjà ò dá, ìjà ò dá. Omi tá a bá dà sórí ilẹ̀ ló bọ̀. Omi tá a bá dà sórí ilẹ̀ ló bọ̀. Tó bá dọjọ́ ọjọ́ kan a ó jìnnì iṣẹ́ wa, a ó jìnnì iṣẹ́ wa. Ọlọ́run ọba. Ẹnì kọ́kọ́ ni láti máa dọ̀bálẹ̀ fún. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. Dọ̀bálẹ̀ fún ọ. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá, ti yá, ti yá, aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. Jésù ló faṣọ ìjà mi yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá, aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. Bẹ́nìkan bá fẹ́ létí kó dọ̀bálẹ̀ fún kó sọ fún wípé. Aṣọ ìjà ẹ̀ ti bò. Sẹ́nìkan máa fẹ́ bá ẹ̀yà kó ṣàlàyé fún mi pé. Aṣọ ìjà ẹ̀ ti yá, ti yá, ti yá, aṣọ ìjà ẹ̀ ti bò. Sẹ́nìkan bá mi létí máa dọ̀bálẹ̀ fún o. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. Jésù ló faṣọ ìjà mi yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá, ti yá, ti yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. Jésù ló faṣọ ìjà mi yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. kárí láyé ló yẹ láti fi ṣàpẹẹrẹ. ẹni tó jẹ́mọ̀ lọ́run tó jẹ́ akọni tó fẹ́ràn ìlú ẹ̀ ló yẹ láti fi ṣàpẹẹrẹ. bẹ́nìkan bá bá ẹja kó ṣàlàyé fún wípé ìjà ò dáa ìjà ò dáa. bẹ́nìkan bá mi láti máa dọ̀bálẹ̀ fún mi. aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. bẹ́nìkan bá mi láti máa dọ̀bálẹ̀ fún mi. aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. Jésù ló faṣọ ìjà mi yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. ẹnìkan gbọ́ ẹlẹ́ tí kò ṣàlàyé fún. aṣọ ìjà ẹ ti yá. Aṣọ ìjà ẹ ti bò. ẹnìkan bá mi láti máa dọ̀bálẹ̀ fún o. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. Jésù ló faṣọ ìjà mi yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. Jésù ló faṣọ ìjà mi yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. ẹnìkan bá ẹlẹ́ tí kò dọ̀bálẹ̀ fún. Aṣọ ìjà ẹ ti yá. Aṣọ ìjà ẹ ti bò. Jésù ló faṣọ ìjà mi yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá. Ó yá pátápátá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. Láti bàbá mi létí máa dọ̀bálẹ̀ fún. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti bò. Aṣọ ìjà mi ti yá. Aṣọ ìjà mi.
rédíò Amuludun 99.1 FM àgbétàládànù tuntun lágbóró.
mo wá rí ìfọ̀bá ọba mẹ́sàyà. mo wá rí mojúbà o.
mo wá rí ìfọ̀bá ọba mẹ́sàyà.
àwọn áńgẹ́lì kéde rẹ̀.
amòye forí balẹ̀ fún.
àwọn áńgẹ́lì kéde rẹ̀ o.
amòye forí balẹ̀ fún.
ògbàdé wáyé o.
ọmọdé tàgbà ṣe lọ́ba.
ògbàdé lérí o.
ọmọdé tàgbà ṣe lọ́ba.
òrèlé ìwé kankan.
olùkọ́ àgbà ní.
bá mi o. òrèlé ìwé kankan.
olùkọ́ àgbà ní.
kò mọ̀ nípa mẹ́dísìn.
oníṣègùn ńlá ní.
kò mọ̀ nípa mẹ́dísìn.
oníṣègùn ńlá ní.
ẹnìkan ṣoṣo tó sọ pé.
òkè náà ti wáyé.
ẹnìkan ṣoṣo tó sọ pé.
òkè náà ti wáyé.
mo kọ́ sí agbẹjọ́rò.
alákàwé ẹ̀dá ni.
Jésù mo kọ́ sí agbẹjọ́rò.
alákàwé ẹ̀dá ni.
mo kọ́lé ìjọsìn.
gbogbo ayé lọ́kọ̀ fún o. mo wá rí ọba mẹ́sàyà.
ajakari ọ̀run o.
ajakari ayé mọ́ ṣẹ̀dá rẹ̀.
bàbá o ajakari ọ̀run o.
ajakari ayé mọ́ ṣẹ̀dá rẹ̀. ìwọ tó níná ilé tí mọ́ ara o. ìjẹ̀rẹ̀ ọ̀tá sílẹ̀ ṣẹ̀dá lọ. agbára rẹ̀ pọ̀ ayé wádìí ẹ̀ kò rújú. àfàwọn ọmọ bí irú tèmi lólórí ìpínlẹ̀ lọ́wọ́.
ọmọ Heli, ọmọ Matati, ọmọ Levi, ọmọ Melki, ọmọ Jana, tíṣe ọmọ Joseph, ọmọ Matatai, ọmọ Amos, ọmọ Nahumu, ọmọ Esli, ọmọ Nagai, ọmọ Mahati, ọmọ Matatia, ọmọ Simei, ọmọ Joseph, ọmọ Juda, ọmọ Johanna, ọmọ Resa, ọmọ Sorobabeli, ọmọ Salatieli, ọmọ Neri, ọmọ Melki, ọmọ Hadi, ọmọ Kosamu, ọmọ Elmodamu, ọmọ Eri, ọmọ Joseph, ọmọ Elieseri, tí sọmọ Jorimu, ọmọ Matati, tí sọmọ Levi, ọmọ Simeoni, ọmọ Juda, tí sọmọ Joseph, ọmọ Jonani, ọmọ Elikimu, Eliakimu, ọmọ Melei, ọmọ Menani, tí sọmọ Matata, ọmọ Natani, tí sọmọ Davidi, tí sọmọ Jese, ọmọ Obedi, ọmọ Boasi, ọmọ Salmoni, ọmọ Nasoni, ọmọ Aminadabu, ọmọ Aramu, ọmọ Esromu, ọmọ Farasi, tí sọmọ Juda, ọmọ Jacobu, tí sọmọ Isaki, ọmọ Abrahamu, tí sọmọ Tera, ọmọ Nakoru, Lao, ọmọ Saruku, ọmọ Ragam, ọmọ Faleki, ọmọ Eberi, ọmọ Sala, tí sọmọ Kenani, ọmọ Afaksadi, ọmọ Semu, tí sọmọ Noah, tí sọmọ Lameki, tí sọmọ Metusela, ọmọ Inoku, ọmọ Jaredi, ọmọ Maleleli, tí sọmọ Kenani, ọmọ Inasi, tí sọmọ Seti, ọba kan Ebel, tí sọmọ Adam. Olúwa ti pèsè rẹ̀ ní ìpilẹ̀ṣẹ̀ ìwà rẹ̀ ṣáájú iṣẹ́ rẹ̀ àtijọ́. Ajakari ayé o.
Ajakari ayé mo ṣe bàrẹ̀.
Ìwé òwe orí ìkẹjọ ẹsẹ̀ ìkejìlélógún ní ẹsẹ̀ ọgbọ̀n.
Ajakari ayé mo ṣe
bàrẹ̀. Àti yàn láti ayérayé láti ìpìlẹ̀ tàbí kí ayé tó wà. Nígbà tí àkókò kò sí, àti bí ọba nígbà tí kò sí orísun tó kún fún omi púpọ̀ kí á tó fi di àwọn òkè ńlá sọlẹ̀. Ṣáájú àwọn òkè ńlá ilé a ti fi nígbà tí kò tí ì dá ayé tàbí pẹ̀tẹ́lẹ̀ tàbí orí èrùpẹ̀ ayé. Nígbà tí ó ń ṣe ìpìlẹ̀ tí àwọn ọ̀run Jésù wà níbẹ̀. Nígbà tí ó fi òṣùwọ̀n àyíkálé ojú ọ̀gbun o. Nígbà tí ó sọ àwọn sánmọ̀ lọ́jọ́ sókè. Nígbà tí ó fi agbára fún orísun ibú. Ó má kọjá ẹnu rẹ̀ o. Kábíyèsí ìbà rẹ̀ títí.
Ayérayé ọba.
Ìbà rẹ̀ títí o.
Ayérayé ọba.
Jésù ìbà rẹ̀ níwájú.
Ìbà rẹ̀ lẹ́yìn.
Bàbá mi o ìbà rẹ̀ níwájú.
Ìbà rẹ̀ lẹ́yìn.
Ìbà rẹ̀ lọ́ọ̀tún o.
Ìbà rẹ̀ lọ́ọ̀sì.
Ọlọ́run ìbà rẹ̀ lọ́ọ̀tún o.
Ìbà rẹ̀ lọ́ọ̀sì.
Olúwa o ìbà rẹ̀ láàyè.
Ìbà rẹ̀ lọ́run o.
Bàbá mi o ìbà rẹ̀ láàyè.
Ìbà rẹ̀ lọ́run o. Mo dákun sọ.
Mo gbé ọ̀gá.
Mo dákun sọ.
Mo fìyìn fún ọ.
Sẹ́ni tí kò jẹ́ kí n tó ṣe ṣubú.
Alátìlẹ́yìn mi.
Mo dákun sọ.
Bàbá mi o.
Mo dákun sọ.
Bàbá o.
Sábà tí kò jẹ́ ayé rí mi mọ́.
Tàlàfiwé Ọlọ́run mi. Tàlàfiwé Ọlọ́run ọba mi. Ọba tó lọ kánrin 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 kẹsẹ̀. Ó ga jù ọ̀run lọ, yóò bá o.
Ó ga jù ọ̀run lọ.
Ó ga jù ọ̀run lọ, yóò bá mi.
Ó ga jù ọ̀run lọ.
Ìfẹ́ rẹ̀,
Ìmẹ́sọ̀ rẹ̀ kò ní.
ẹnu ò lè ròyìn.
Ó ti ṣètò.
Jésù ti wà lè ròyìn.
mo ti ṣetán.
Jésù ti wà.
àtọ̀dáyé náà rò.
Ó wà lọ́dọ̀ bàbá.
gẹ́gẹ́ bí oníṣẹ́.
Jésù ti wà.
àtọ̀dáyé náà rò.
Ó wà lọ́dọ̀ bàbá.
gẹ́gẹ́ bí oníṣẹ́. àwa márìndé lọ́lọ́run ọ̀pọ̀ iná tó yí wá ká.
Kí ni n bá ṣe bí o sọpẹ́?
Ọpẹ́yẹmí.
Gratitude fits me.
Ọpẹ́yẹmí.
Okùn táyé pojóbó.
Ó gbé mi lẹ́sẹ̀ ṣubú.
Okùn táyé pojóbó.
Ó gbé mi lẹ́sẹ̀ ṣubú.
Ọ̀nà táyé gbà tó ń kú.
Ìmọ̀ra rí yé kọjá.
Ọ̀nà táyé gbà tó ń kú.
Ìmọ̀ra rí yé kọjá.
Níbi tẹ́gbẹ́ mi ṣègbé.
Láti yọ mí léwu.
Níbi tẹ́gbẹ́ mi ṣègbé.
Láti yọ mí léwu.
Ilẹ̀ tó jẹ́ yangí.
Ìtàn fi lánà.
Àní ilẹ̀ tó jẹ́ yangí.
Ìtàn fi lánà.
Èkùrọ̀ tó lé kókó.
Ẹni má ní fi jẹ́.
Èkùrọ̀ tó lé kókó.
Ẹni má ní fi jẹ́.
Ẹ̀jẹ̀ Jésù Kristi
ló sọ mí dẹ̀rọ̀ òun.
Ẹ̀jẹ̀ Kristi Jésù
ló sọ mí dẹ̀rọ̀ òun.
Àwọn tó lé kọ́nà tó tún rọwọ́ kúrakúra.
Ẹgbẹ́ mi ti lọ.
Ọpẹ́yẹmí o.
Ọpẹ́yẹmí.
Gratitude fits me.
Ọpẹ́yẹmí.
Okùn táyé pojóbó.
Ó gbé mi lẹ́sẹ̀ ṣubú.